Today we're talking with Tracy Potter, who's running for District 35 Senate seat, and he's won the nomination on the Democratic side. Tracy, thanks for coming and talking with us today.
You bet. Glad to be here. Thank you for having me.
So you got a pretty long history in North Dakota politics and government and different things like that. Explain to our viewers kind of what got you to this point.
Well, I actually started stumping around carrying signs and things when I was still in high school, and so I've been at politically involved really my whole life. But currently, what motivated me this year was that my good friend Erin Oban, the state senator from our district, just said she'd had enough of it. She's got a young son, and the attitudes in the legislature were disturbing to her, and so she stepped aside. And I thought it's really important that there be somebody that represents the independents and the Democratic NPLers of this wide region, because she was the only one representing the Democrats, or not only one, not a Republican, is the way I'd say it more. She's the only one that wasn't affiliated with the Republican Party that served in the legislature, that was from south of the Turtle Mountains and west of I-29. And so it's important that we do have broad bipartisan representation. There has to be bipartisanship. I know you guys are up in Minot, or somewhat affiliated with Minot. Minot always had a bipartisan delegation, and it would come together to support Minot. There are issues that are not partisan. There are issues that are regional, and then there are issues that are specific to a single community. And it's better if a community speaks with all the voices within that community when it's in the legislature. So anyway, I said, no, I've done this before. I won in this district before. I represented it from 2006 to 2010. And I know what the attitudes are like up there. I know that people are contentious. I can handle that. I've been in politics a long time. I can handle that, and I think I can deliver something based on my experience. I have a track record, and I can run on that. And the fact is that experience is going to be in short supply in the legislature this year. We're losing the majority and minority leaders in the Senate, and losing Erin, who's quite competent. We're also losing the majority leader in the House. There are we just lost Ray Holmberg is not going to run, the chairman of the funding branch of government. He's been there forever, and yet now we're going to be short on it. And I'd like to add my experience to the mix.
You were a history teacher from what I've read, and there's a lot of history in North Dakota politics. What's interesting, on your press release, equal opportunities for all, special privilege for none. I think one of the sentiments that I'm getting from traveling the country or the state of North Dakota and talking to people is we just want legislators who listen to us. Because there's a lot of stuff that happens in Bismarck, and DC, and even at the city council and school board level, where most of the people don't feel that they're being listened to. How are you, if you're elected, going to help with solve that problem?
It comes from an attitude of things should bubble up. They don't come from the top down. When it does come from the top down, from a handful of people who have achieved some kind of leadership in the one party that dominates our state, they don't feel they need to listen. I know from my experience knocking on doors that the only effective way to be a candidate is to listen less, talk less, and listen more, and find out what's motivating people. I know one of the issues this year in my district and probably all across the state is that property taxes have been going crazy. My personal property taxes went up over 21% this year.
Wow.
They're $550 bump in my property taxes, and so that's an issue. But how you deal with that is the key thing. Because if you just say, okay, top down, we're going to tell the counties and the cities and the school boards and the park districts that you're cutting me off. You just can't charge these things. Well, those people are elected too, and they develop budgets based on what they're hearing from their constituents. And so the way to approach property tax relief is not by telling the local people what to do. I think the legislature is too full of itself when it does that. You have to listen to everybody. Listen to the township association. Listen to the cities and counties when they come in, and you realize, no, that's the wrong way to handle this. The right way to handle this is the way I did in 2007 when I was a freshman legislator, and I looked around and I said, boy, this thing is no one's going to come to a conclusion on this, because the old hands in the legislature say, property tax, that's not our problem. That's the locals. And if we're going to do anything, we're going to tell them what to do. And I saw the city and county representatives going, well, that's, you can't do that. And honest to God, my bill lost 2 weeks in. What I was doing was I said an income tax credit for property taxes paid. Refundable income tax credit for property taxes paid. So 10% of your property taxes would come right off your income tax, and that would be refundable for those people that didn't owe income tax. It'd come off their property taxes. So that way you could handle both sides of this issue and help the people that need the help. That is the taxpayer. And so we would deliver the money not to the cities and counties, but to deliver it directly to the taxpayer through an income tax thing. Well, my bill got beat on a party line vote 2 weeks into the session. The last day of the session, they still had not solved property tax relief, and they felt they needed to. And so the legislative council attorney who drafted my bill was helping the conference committee try to figure out what they were going to do. And he said, well, I've got an idea. And he brought down my bill, and they passed it basically in total. A couple of amendments to it, but it was my bill. I just sat there like a Cheshire cat, not daring to grin too widely, because I figured, if it's going to go through, I don't want to be taking the credit for it. I'll take it now. I'll take the credit now. But at the time, I didn't want to be taking the credit for it because I wanted it to pass. And it did, and it delivered almost $100 million in property tax relief to the people. So listening and figuring out what the end game is. Where do we find a compromise that satisfies everybody? That's a skill set I think I have, and I want to offer
it. There's a lot of and I'm going to say kids, people like me that are 40 and younger, who went around the country. We left out, we traveled out around the country, and we came back, and because that's what we were told we needed to do when we were growing up, is go get a worldview, go learn a skill, come back to North Dakota. And there's a lot of us that feel like we've been left out because we came back to North Dakota so we could raise our kids the way we were raised, and yet there's still a lot of policies that are filtering into North Dakota that take away the responsibility of kids, and then we're not appreciated in a sense when we come back to North Dakota. Speak to that group of people and how you can help with that in the Senate.
You said a mouthful there. I hear you. That's and similarly, I did that too in my late 20s. Traveled actually early 20s. I thought I was leaving North Dakota, and I tried some other places and went, nah, I like North Dakota, and I came back to stay. But one of the things that I think people feel is our educational system was really excellent. I was very lucky. I had a great public school education all the way through college, and cheap. It was not ridiculously expensive. People are struggling now with that. Daycare. Young families struggle with daycare. They struggle with the student loan debt, and we need to find ways to make this state more livable for those people who have a worldview, have gotten out and seen it, seen the world, and now can add something back into the mix here in the state. How we do that, we have the tools within our grasp. We've been, blessed by nature with the oil reserves that our state has, and the coal reserves, the energy, the wind, the solar. We have all the energy reserves in a century that needs energy, and we've been, really overwhelmed by oil development in a lot of ways, environmentally, economically, the housing. Oh my gosh! In 2006, 2007, when it was really going crazy, people were leaving Williston. They'd sold they'd sold their homes, moved into an apartment because they were senior citizens and they wanted to, just live there. All of a sudden, the rents were too high and they had to leave their town. It was the impacts were terrible. But on the other hand, the impacts also filled the state's treasury with billions of dollars. I believe I just heard that we have $20 billion in trust funds under investment right now. 20 billion. The legacy fund itself was projected to grow by more than $1 billion this biennium to be about 10. And that was before gas. That was when when oil was $50 a barrel, and now it's $117 a barrel, or 111 right now. Yep. At the moment. I'm watching the markets, and with that, we have treasuries overflowing. How do we invest back into the people? Don't just sit on that money and hope that our grandchildren are going to be trust fund babies with all the money that we've salted away. Invest it in making life better for North Dakotans today, and that's what I try to look at. You can no longer say, no, we can't afford it. Can't afford to help parents with childcare. We can't afford to lower the interest rates on student loans. We can. Yes, we can. We can afford all of that. The question is, what do we want to do, and how do we do it pragmatically and practically and humanely? So,
what do you say to the state agencies? And I guess I ask this question because I got a lot of respect for state agencies in North Dakota. I mean, it's having lived around the country, you never have a positive DOT experience in any other state. In North Dakota, you can walk away with a smile. So I'm asking this question with the utmost respect for our state agencies. But with that trust fund, why is it fees are still going up for, just those little things in North Dakota?
It's old line thinking is what it is. For instance, DOT particular. DOT, we always say, well, no, that's funded by the gas tax. Well, the gas tax hits directly the pocketbooks of everybody, meaning it hits those with the least the most, right? I mean, anybody who's living on a low wage income finds the cost of gas overwhelming. It's a big part of their lives, and so we don't want to raise the gas tax. But fees, you're right, and that's it's an old line thinking that, if we're charging fees, it's not taxes. Well, come on, it's money from my pocket going to the government that has its pockets overflowing. But when you talk about state agencies, I think we've got, we are lucky. We've got state workers that are really dedicated to the job. Game and Fish Department is fantastic. I wish our Parks and Recreation wanted more parks and more recreation. But they're really dedicated state employees, and everybody should understand that. And they are a group that is typically has lower wages than the market for the jobs, similar jobs.
Well, and you throw
but they've got great benefits.
And you throw Forest Service into that mix. State Parks and Rec, Game and Fish, and Forest Service. Those are agencies. We have a huge trust fund, and yet they get virtually no money from the state coffers, and so their hands are tied in many ways on many things, and they a lot of great employees that do a lot of good work, but again, their hands are tied. And
All,
yet
all
hunting and
true.
fishing fees just went up substantially in a time during all this COVID and everything else that really hurt all the families that live off of hunting licenses to feed their
Right.
families.
Right.
How did the folks in Bismarck fix that?
I think it's to recognize that we need a new model, and that these things like, oh, we'll never send general fund money over to DOT. Well, no, you have to. And general fund money to game and fish. Yes, it's great that game and fish is able to be supported strictly by hunters and fisher anglers. But I always have trouble with fishermen because there's fisher women, and you don't want to call them fisher people because those are those little toys. Anglers. So anyway, but yeah, no, we need to recognize that those general funds that we can generate through the oil tax and through other one-time harvests, that they can be assigned to these needs that the state has. The Parks Department, I had a long relationship with the Parks Department. I was part of the Parks and Tourism Office when existed, and then I worked with Parks for over 21 years when I was running the Fort Abraham Lincoln Foundation, because we were the engine. They were the rock that managed the state park, Fort Lincoln State Park, but we were the engine that made it a tourism attraction that gave living history interpretation about Custer and about the Mandan Indians, and built stables and built the Custer House, and it was all our private foundation that did that. And you could really recognize there were conflicts in that, but there was just basically there were annually there were problems over contracts and things. How do we be more innovative and entrepreneurial while still maintaining the security and the public face of a state park, and so in those regards, the people are all good, but it's the feeling of being stuck in your silo instead of seeing the state as a whole, the state government as a whole. I mean, just silly little things like the IT department may get charged for the lawyers that the attorney general sends over, and it's all our money. It's and so really, I think there are lots of ways to run it a little more efficiently. But in general, it's just, let's recognize that we have the funds to build the state that we want to build, and so really we're only limited by our imaginations and how we go about things.
You may be I guess you're uniquely qualified to maybe answer this question with your background. Um, Tourism on Lake Sakakawea brings in a lot of money
Yeah.
every year, and this is going to be another low water year. For instance, a lot of people don't understand that conflict between tourism and boat ramps, and lack of funding for game and fish to make some of those boat ramps accessible and stuff. What can the folks in Bismarck do to help out that tourism, and what those dollars really mean to the local communities?
It's a really difficult one. And yet you're right. I have had experience with this. I remember being up there at Slater's Resort on the southwest side, and the problem is the Corps of Engineers is regulating the water levels, and so to make investments along the lakeshore is a really uncertain thing, because it might go up or down by 30 feet, and this is a real problem. The state has to be conscious of that and respond to it, extending boat ramps when you need to extend boat ramps in low water years. That's prime, but also providing the auxiliary services that the private sector may not be willing to invest in. Then the state has to do that.
What what's something I think it's fair to say that most citizens of North Dakota and the United States are sick of politicians complaining and fighting amongst each other. And
That's for sure.
and what you know, I guess for me, I remember having a conversation with a fellow a couple years back that said, "I want to return to the days where my dad, who disagreed with somebody else at the lumberyard, could sit and argue all day and then go out for coffee and be best friends and fish that night. What do we in North Dakota have to do to get back to that?
It's a good question. Ray Holmberg, who just left the state senate, it just announced his retirement. Appropriations committee is what I was stuck on the other day, the other minute. Ray and I were friends. We were complementary to each other, and we could argue on the floor and then walk over, shake hands, and everything's great. And many of the Senate had more collegiality, I think, and more of that than the House did. The House, I always thought, kind of a bunch of monkeys over there. Boy, they're just they didn't even pay attention when the other ones are talking. That's a snotty senatorial thing to say, but there is a need for that. People get too hardened in their views. You may disagree with me on something, but you don't have to dislike me for having my point of view, and I don't have to dislike you for having your point of view. We need to try to find ways that maybe we're both a little bit right, and maybe we can find ways that that I'm hearing you, and could this work and still be part of your principles? We're so polarized right now, and that it's not just the last 5 years, but it's been going on for some time, and I don't know how national politics entered our state the way they did, and how, I guess maybe it's the cable news networks. People, instead of getting their news at 6:00 from KFYR, they're getting their news from New York and Washington, and from talking heads that are hardened positions on politics, and maybe that's it. Maybe we're fighting other people's wars when we don't need to. The problem here is our street. Is it okay? A game of fish, is that, are we? Those are the issues that matter to the North Dakota legislature. It should matter to us. It shouldn't be these things where it was kind of ridiculous in the special session here. They had a 5-day special session for reapportionment. And in 5 days, you're not actually supposed to be able to do anything in the legislature. Seriously. I mean, it takes 3 days to pass a bill. And that's if you don't have real public hearings and you don't announce them. And everything. Well, in those 5 days, they passed a bill banning the teaching of something that no one was teaching in North Dakota. They passed a bill banning vaccine mandates that no one was mandating in North Dakota. They got wrapped up because they heard on their on their choice of on their media of choice that these were issues. They're not issues in North Dakota. Unless you want to tell me specifically what part of our history don't you want to talk about? Are we forbidden from talking about it?
Well, and I think so. I guess hearing you say that, so for me, I think that we're not teaching enough history, and we're afraid of history in America. However, when it comes to the CRT bill, I think the thing that was frustrating to a lot of North Dakotans is when the senator said, "Okay, we're passing this bill, but it's not being taught anywhere," and yet my daughter comes home that week with CRT curriculum that she's being taught and forced to be part of in our local Class B school.
Really?
That's really frustrating to us in North Dakota.
Because everybody says it's not being taught. In what form did that come? Because that's a postgraduate.
Exactly. I think it's definitely a conversation for college. Right. But as a sophomore in high school, being forced to take a CRT survey in English class isn't right. And as a parent, the thing I appreciate is we had a school board and a superintendent that handled the situation really well, and it was all resolved very clearly. However, these things are creeping into North Dakota all over the place, even though the senators and representatives down in Bismarck aren't in touch enough, I think, with what's going on in our schools and our communities to know any different.
Well, let's do this. This is an example of how we can talk together, right? To my mind, and I ran for superintendent of public instruction, and my whole campaign was testing ain't teaching. I didn't say ain't because I was running for superintendent of public instruction, but testing isn't teaching, and that we had a bipartisan agreement. There was a bipartisan agreement to go the wrong way in education when we decided that we needed to make the teachers more accountable somehow. And what could we do? Well, we'll see how the kids do on standardized tests. Well, standardized tests make standardized students, and the time that you spend training them to respond to the standardized thing that you're telling them, that's time that's wasted, because you should be just discussing stuff with kids. My thing is, I'm a history and civics teacher. Well, those are discussion classes.
Yep.
Math is, of course, a whole different subject. Science is different from that. But to my mind, that's what was wrong with our education. There is no subject that I would avoid if the students wanted to talk about it. And I believe in teachers being able to teach. They're the ones that are trained to do that. Now, if they're getting orders from on high that this is what you have to teach, well, I'm against that. But if they're trying to pay attention to each and every one of those children in their classrooms and bring them along as best they can, sometimes there are uncomfortable topics. The little bighorn has two sides to it. And they need to be, we need to look at that. Plus, the first thing is, let's not be guilty about what our ancestors did. They did it. We didn't do it.
Yep.
And I just said this the other day. The great thing about America is that we changed. We've changed. When they wrote the Constitution, only male property owners could vote. Then we got it so that no, everybody, you don't have to own property. You can all vote, all the men. And then we got it so that we ended slavery, and then we let black men vote. We still didn't let women vote until the 20th century, but we accomplished that. Native Americans were the last in many states to get the right to vote, but that's happened now. I mean, we have progressed as a society, and we should be proud of it, as opposed to feeling guilty about the fact that at one time our forefathers were slave owners.
Which brings up a very interesting point in North Dakota politics. I was talking to a school board member from another town who said in the 8 years he was on school board, he only had one parent show up for their tax meeting at all of those school board meetings. One of the things we're discovering, and I'm working on a series of stories about, but most people don't know that there's district conferences or conventions, both on the Republican and Democratic Party. Like when you had your convention to be elected, you won your nomination for your district. How many people were at that event?
It was more than at the other districts. It was about 40.
40.
Yeah.
So most
but the
people
Republicans
don't
had 120 at theirs.
So most people, but I think it's fair to say in North Dakota, most people don't even know that those little district events happen, and that's a place for them to vote where their voice can be heard. From a history teacher perspective, but also as somebody running for office, how important is it for us as North Dakotans to get involved at that level?
Let me tell you, when I was a student teacher in Grand Forks Central, I was welcome back Potter. I was back in the classroom that I graduated from doing my student teaching, and it was a kind of an innovative classroom thing. They called it core anyway, but we had large classes, and in that class I was given the opportunity to teach about something. I decided to teach about political involvement. And so I brought in Elliot Glassheim. You might have heard of him. He was a state representative until a couple of years ago. I brought in Elliot into the classroom to sit there and then poked at my kids to make sure they were asking him questions. What about, curfew? What about things that are respond to us? Well, why can't we smoke and our parents can't? Whatever it is, and then said, okay, how would you get involved in this? And I told them about the district conventions that were being held, and in fact, that's where I sunk my teeth into politics right off the bat. Was not electoral politics; it was district conventions. How do we nominate the candidates that we want, and how do we pass the platform that we want? So I think it's very important. I think it ought to be an essential part of our civics that we tell people where they can get involved. Where is the grassroots part of politics? And very important to them. So, you mentioned going to the, your daughter was the student that. Okay, this is the one that got me. I was really, really angry at the governor of Virginia in his reelection campaign, or in his election campaign this last time, because when people started pressing him on, parental involvement, he said something stupid. He said something, I don't know what it was, but it was like, oh, parents, what do they know? Well, no, parents should be involved. Like you should go to this, the fact. And so I'll say it every time. How should parents be involved? Well, join PTA. Go to your parent-teacher conferences. Go to the school board meetings. Not to yell, not to berate, not to threaten, but just to find out what's going on. And if you don't like what they're doing, run for it. This is how the system is supposed to be arranged. It's not just the loudest voices in the room. It's the persistence of talking and conversing and making sure that your voice is being heard. And that's where, see, I don't think we really have a problem with parents not being part of our education. I think our biggest problem is legislators are part of our education. And Congress of the United States is part of our education. They've all made this stupid error that we need to test kids to find out whether or not they're doing well. You know when to test kids to see if they did well? When they're your age. That's when we're supposed to, that's what really matters. How did the education affect you as a person, and give you skills that you can use in your life? It's not whether or not you could remember the stuff on the test for, that may be irrelevant to you. If you've got an artistic bent, you may not be interested in history at all, but we're going to teach you some of it just so you got the basics. But anyway, I go on and on about this topic.
What's the future for North Dakota hold?
I think it's a good solid future. We're not going to when the sea levels rise, they're not going to get us. We've got resources. What's important is that our human resources be given every opportunity to shine, to grow, because that's the thing. When we were suffering from out migration, I some years ago I went to every county courthouse in the state and gave a speech about that county, and virtually every county, other than the 4 or 5 major ones, had desperately lost population since the 1930s. The 1930 was about the height of their populations, and we had this outmigration. And the sad part was that the best and the brightest were leaving, and so we need to make sure that we've given every opportunity for the best and the brightest to stay and find good things to do here. But also that everybody become the best and the brightest, that all our kids get, that's the equal opportunity part of what I said, which was basically a takeoff from the old NPL. They said social and economic justice for all, special privilege for none. But I thought equal opportunity was a better sell in the 21st century.
So I guess my last question for you, and this is maybe hitting more on your history education background and stuff, but North Dakota is a very Republican state. Is on when you look at Bismarck, um, but having traveled the country and stuff, I think it's fair to say that North Dakota has a lot of Republicans in Bismarck and very few Democrats. But the two political parties in North Dakota are urban and rural. What's your take on the misunderstanding of just because somebody has a Republican or a R or D after their title, that their viewpoints are actually the same in our state?
Somebody said to me the other day, "I'll never vote for a Democrat again. Not after the squad." I said, I'm not a member of the squad. What do I think? Pendulum swings. We were a one-party state for, the first, you know, about 30 years of our history, and then the NPL, recognizing that, ran its candidates, its socialist candidates, in the Republican primary, and won. Talk about an urban-rural split. It was the farmers that did that, and took over with policies that affected them. But it's gone back and forth. We had Democratic governors, except for Alan Olson in there for just 4 years. We had Democratic governors for 32 years. Now we've had 32 years or 30 years, it'll be 32, of Republican governors. That's the key to building a party. But you're absolutely right. In the legislature, you'll find most issues, 90%, are not partisan. But if they're partisan, it breaks down on what you said. It's a rural and urban line. And those things, I think, the sad fact of demographics is the rural areas lose their punch. One thing that could help, though, provide better representation in rural areas, is if you split the House districts into two sub-districts all across the state. I say they did that on these two reservations, but the district that needs it most is the one that I think it's still called 39 out there, that goes all the way from Bowman to Newtown. Holy crap! It's a 250-mile drive from one to the other. They don't have the population to have more than one senator, but they would have the ability to cut that for House members, and you have more local representation. So I don't know. The cities have lost touch with the fact that they are rich because the rural areas give them the wealth. We've lost track of that in North Dakota. I don't know how you get it back.
Well, anything else you'd like to say?
One thing, I'm running in a district that is a lot of state employees, and probably more than any other district. And not only are they state employees, but they're state employee retirees. And I had no idea until I just was talking to some friends. State employee pensions, they're just fixed. There's a amount you get, and that's the amount that you will get for your whole life. Well, in 2001 was the last time that there was a boost to state pensions. And in those 21 years, we had a lot of them without much inflation, but we've had a lot of inflation in this last one. I would make it my mission to be lobbying all the legislators for just a little boost for those state employees that they gave 20 or 30 years to the state, and now they're finding themselves with a pension that it may be inadequate. And just a little 5% boost wouldn't hurt a thing at one time. So.
Well, thank you so much for spending the time with us today, Tracy, and good luck on the campaign trail.
Thanks very much, Jeremy. Thanks for having me.